That's the greatest challenge we have. To find a way to make people to believe that learning has its own value.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the great fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. The Everything Band podcast is a proud member of the Music Teachers Development Podcast Network. The Muted Network provides support in the form of audio on-demand programming designed by and for music educators. You can find more information about our network at mutedpodcasts.com. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I really appreciate your time and hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you know one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Remember, help your students live up to the best that is in them through music. A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to interview Mr. Joseph Kreines, who is a legend in the state of Florida. Now, Mr. Kreines doesn't use email, so the interview is not in its normal format. However, he's a really interesting man and has a great story. And so now, on to my next guest, Mr. Joseph Kreines. What I want to start with is I was wondering if you could kind of tell your background story and tell me how you got into music and how you got started.
I was 6.5 years old when I started taking piano lessons. And I loved playing piano, but I didn't know anything about anything else really until my father's cousin took me to a Chicago Symphony concert, which featured Artur Rubinstein playing the Beethoven Fourth Piano Concerto with the Chicago Symphony, and I was wiped out. And from that point on, when I was 15. My parents bought me a subscription to the Chicago Symphony, the Thursday night series, so I got to hear a lot of great music, magnificently played, of course, most of the time, and very well conducted with all the great soloists. And I started subscribing to all several of the different music series, the Allied Arts Piano Series, and Allied Arts, what was it called? I can't remember now. The one was piano, but then the other one was all different instrumentalists coming and vocalists too. So I heard, and then I between all of those plus going to hear regular recitals at Orchestra Hall, now called Symphony Center, but then it was called Orchestra Hall, I heard a lot of music. And when I was 9, I started collecting records. Rhapsody in Blue was the first thing I bought because I had been playing the simplified version that Henry Levine made of the theme, from Rhapsody in Blue. And then I got this album, and I said, my God, it's a much longer piece than I've been playing. And I was only 9. I didn't realize that it was a major work. So Anyway, by the time I was 11, I had collected over 50 78 RPM albums. And my library, if you ever get back down to Florida, you have to come visit me. I have 10,000 recordings in my library.
Wow.
And I don't just have piano. I have everything. I have opera. I have vocal music. I have piano music. I have chamber music. I love chamber music, string quartet, and so on and so forth, and orchestra and band. Anyway, so I came to Florida when I was 25. I was hired on as assistant conductor of the Florida Symphony. And it was, wait a minute, I got to get the dates right. Yeah, 1961. And that was a great opportunity for me because I had never conducted a professional group up to that point. But I was hired thanks to one of the members of the Florida Symphony who raved about what a wonderful conductor I was, and they were looking for an assistant, so they brought me in. Anyway, I was with them for 5 years, and then I left that and came over. I got a letter indicating that the Brevard Symphony over here was looking for a conductor, and they had called the Florida Symphony office, and my name was mentioned. So I became the conductor of the Brevard Symphony in the fall of 1965. And I was with the orchestra for 11 years. And I built up my repertory and my knowledge of the orchestra and so on and so forth. And I was well endowed with the knowledge that a musician, a conductor, has to have. So then, in the meantime, a couple of my I was conducting the youth orchestra that was formed. The members of the youth orchestra really were very receptive, and they really liked working with me. So, but in the meantime, it was indicated to me that at the last rehearsal of the Florida Symphony, one of the singers who was singing with us in the Beethoven Ninth indicated, I asked her if there was any openings for anything, and she indicated that Lake George Opera was open for an assistant. David Lloyd, the tenor soloist, was the head of the Lake George Opera, and I spoke to him, and he said, "Yeah, we can use somebody like you." So I went up there, and I spent 3 summers there. Great experience. I had a chance to conduct a couple of operas and work plus do a lot of the orchestra rehearsing. Anyway, while I was there, I got this letter indicating that the Brevard Symphony was looking for a conductor, and my name was mentioned, and I went and did the first rehearsal of the season, and they liked me and hired me and brought me in. So that was the beginning of my career in Brevard County.
Mm-hmm.
And but in the meantime, I had gotten to know a couple of the members of the youth orchestra. I used to visit the schools that these kids were in, and talk with the band directors, and they had heard about me and were interested in having me come in and blah, 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 blah. And before I knew it, I was working with bands.
Mm-hmm.
So I became well known as a clinician conductor all over the state, bands and orchestras, and chorus, too. Because the real secret of being a clinician is your musicianship. Whether you look like a really great conductor or not, it's pretty much worthless when you're dealing with educational situations. You don't have to look like Leonard Bernstein. You have to be a good musician.
Yeah, absolutely.
And unfortunately, a lot of people misunderstand that. They think that a conductor has to look, suave and brilliant and all that stuff. Bull crap. Mm-hmm. I mean, that may be good for the large public who the major orchestras who are hiring conductors. Oh, he looks great. He must be wonderful. But for those of us who really know the music business, that's not what it's all about.
Sure. Yeah. That's part of the image of the conductor, right? Is what the audience sees.
That's right.
Yeah.
But the real secret is knowing how to rehearse, knowing what to rehearse, and getting the right results. And if you can do that, that's what really matters. And that matters especially in the educational area. But it even matters in the professional. Unfortunately, there are a lot of so-called professional conductors who are not good musicians or who are not good conductors, but they get away with murder because the orchestra can play the music despite them. But that's another long story. I don't want to get into that.
Well, I'd prefer to focus on you if that's okay.
Yeah. So anyway, in the process, like I said, people got to know my work. And pretty soon I was doing clinics all over the state of Florida, except maybe in the Panhandle, which I couldn't get to because it was so far away. Although yeah. I did make one trip up there. I spent 3 or 4 days because several of the band directors were interested in having me. So I worked it out so I could go to 3 or 4 different cities up there. Mm-hmm. Pensacola, Panama City, and so on, and work with the bands there. So it was a great career in that respect. But
sure,
after a while, the driving got to me, and for one thing, and I got older. I mean, I can still do a good rehearsal and work with any group, but it was wearing me down. So I had to give up a lot of the clinic work that I was doing, the driving. But in more recent years, I've been doing I've been composing and transcribing, and a number of my pieces have been published. Alfred Music has about half a dozen of my titles. And I've done, as I said, in addition to transcribing a lot of pieces, I've also written a number of pieces, most of them based on folk music.
Mm-hmm.
I found I had a knack for taking a folk tune and doing variations on it. So I've done several of those, and several of them are published. And that's about it. If there's anything else you want to know, ask.
Yeah, what I want to know is, how did you become a conductor? One of the things I like to ask guests for my listeners is how do they get into what they do?
Well, as I said, I got really interested in orchestra music. And I started, in addition to listening to it, I started going to the library and taking out orchestra scores. And by the time I was, I was 15 or 16, I was conducting recordings in my bedroom. My mother walked in and she said, "You really love this, don't you?" I said, "Yes, Mom, I want to be a conductor." So that's what started me, and I went to Tanglewood. My first real work studying was at Tanglewood, 1956, 57, and 58. And that was a great experience in every way. I got to hear the Boston Symphony just about every day, and the first 2 years I was what was called an auditor conductor, which meant we were in the conducting class, but we didn't get to conduct the regular student orchestra.
Yeah.
However, there was what was called the scratch orchestra. This was comprised of players in what was called the Tanglewood Study Group. In other words, amateurs who weren't good enough to play in the regular orchestra, but who liked playing chamber music and all that kind of stuff. So they put that together for those of us who were auditors, and we got to conduct at least once a week.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I said, it was a very valuable experience. And in the middle of the second year, the conductor of the student orchestra, who was Ilya at that time, he said, "I want you to come and sight read through with the student orchestra. I want you to sight read through an overture with them, and then we'll talk later." And so after I got finished, he brought me into his dressing room and he said, "I'm going to put you on as an active conductor next year."
Oh, wow. Which
meant I got to conduct the student orchestra. There were four or five of us who were picked to be active conductors, and I was one of them for the 1958 year.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a great experience, and it turned out to be pretty successful. I got noticed by Aaron Copland, who was the dean of the faculty at that time there, and Lukas Foss,
mm-hmm.
and a number of the other people who thought I did a wonderful job. I did the Anton Webern 6 pieces for orchestra,
mm-hmm.
which is a very difficult piece, but I didn't think it was that difficult. I learned it pretty well, and then one of my colleagues said, "You realize how difficult this piece is?" I said, "Well, I don't know. But it was a very successful debut for me, and I got to conduct 2 other times on the student orchestra series. There, came back to Florida, and I was hanging around town and decided that I wanted to find some. Organize something on my own. So I organized a Young Artist Foundation, thanks to my parents' financial help. And starting in 1960, we did a series of concerts. And they worked out very well. They were all small ensemble, no big orchestra. It was all chamber ensemble. But that was good because there wasn't much going on like that in Chicago at that time. So I conducted a number of different kinds of pieces, all brass pieces, all wind pieces. We did a string orchestra concert when I gave one of the first performances of Carl Ruggles' Lilacs. You ever heard that piece?
No, I haven't heard that piece. I know Ruggles, but I don't know that piece.
You got to check it out. It's beautiful. Very dissonant, very complicated, but really beautiful. Anyway, so that's what I did. And then one of the people who was scheduled to be on this series got called to Florida, And that's when I made my Florida appearance in 1961, because he told the conductors they were looking for an assistant, and so I came down here, and you know that part of the story now.
Sure.
So that's where it all started, and like I said, some of the students, band directors, had me in, and they liked my work, and pretty soon I got noticed. Allstate. I got to conduct the Allstate. That time was junior high band in 1973, and it was a very exciting concert. The kids did a fantastic job, and the board said we ought to have Kreines back to do the Allstate senior high band the next year. So I did, 1974, and that led to even more appearances with different bands, and both guest conducting and rehearsals, and also in concerts.
I have a couple questions that come out of that.
Ask away.
So again, I'm trying to find advice and wisdom for my listeners who are mostly band directors out there. And one thing that really stuck out to me was you talked about how you had that overture to Sight Read. Do you remember what overture that was?
No, that was the Coriolan.
Oh, okay.
An overture of Beethoven.
Mm-hmm, sure. Yeah. And so then you said something else about the Webern and how it wasn't difficult as a young man. Do you think it's the same thing about that piece now? Would you approach it differently now?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, it's a piece that you have to really get to know well, because it's complicated, and it's not rhythmically complicated, but it's sonority-wise it's complicated. It's not a 12-tone piece, but it's atonal.
Mm-hmm, yep.
And it's an early work. It's Opus 6. But by that time, he had already been working with Schoenberg, of course, and he didn't. Of course, Schoenberg did the 12-tone thing first, 1924, and then Webern followed right along.
So let me ask you. So what is it about a score study or a score that maybe a young conductor needs to know? Is there some sort of general advice that you could give for that?
Good question. The first thing you do is to open the score and look through it. You're not going to listen to any recording. Let's say you were handed a score. This is going to be the first performance, and you've never heard it before. Okay? So what do? So you thumb through it, and you look at it and see what's going on in it. Then you go back, and you sing the different parts. Mm-hmm. And I say sing deliberately, because you could go to the piano. I do that sometimes. Go to the piano and play the different lines and see, and then play too. And that's one of the reasons why for many years, like George said, you have to be a pianist to be a conductor. And he had a good point, because it makes it easier when you're studying to go to the piano and play what the music sounds like, especially if that's a piece you don't know. And like I said, you're giving the first performance of it. Well, there's no recording of it, so what are you going to do? Mm-hmm. How are you going to learn it?
Right.
But if you sing the parts, and then check, if you have to, check yourself at the piano and see if what you sang was correct. Anyway, you do that throughout the entire process of the initial study. Then you go back and you prop up the score on the music stand, and you start conducting it and singing the main lines while you're conducting. This is no orchestra yet. You're not dealing with any players. You're only dealing with yourself as a conductor. And that's important, because you are still processing the conducting medium itself in this particular piece that you're working on, whatever it happens to be. Then, and like I said, if you've sung through it all, and you do happen to find a recording of it, then play through the recording once, following it with the score, then put the recording away, and then go back to working on it. And in the meantime, you've already made notations on the score, and said, I have to check this out, and I got to learn this better, and so on and so forth. So by the time you've done that, you're probably in reasonable shape to get up in front of a group and conduct it.
That also helps you imagine what the rehearsal challenges are going to be.
Exactly. And if you know your medium, if you know the band medium or the orchestra medium, you know pretty well, that's going to be a difficult part for them to play.
Right.
Or you see there's problems of balance how am I going to balance this? Gee, the trumpets are going to stick out too much and all. And that's still an issue.
Sure.
As you well know.
Yeah.
A lot of band directors are not very good at that.
Yeah. I'm going to try to be careful about what I say next.
No, that's all right.
Yeah. I know as a
I'm not going to accuse you of being incompetent.
No. I know what I was about to say is I know as a composer of band music, I sometimes feel like I have to orchestrate to make up for...
No, of course. Absolutely. You're right. But, you have to figure also that there are times when you have to make a few compromises because, even if the conductor can balance it, it's still going to be a balance issue. Let's face it, brass are going to tend to dominate the band. It really, sometimes you have to cut down to one player per part. Sometimes, but you try to avoid doing that. I don't like to do that, but sometimes you have to.
So I'm curious about that transition into the band world because this is my audience, our band director. So how did you?
Right.
How did you?
Well, I got into it, like I said, by the back door, because I was conducting the youth orchestra, and it never, except for one experience at the University of Chicago when I was conducting the orchestra there. There was also a wind ensemble there, and the guy who was conducting it quit. And one of the players in the orchestra who was also in the wind ensemble asked me, "Can you come and do a rehearsal with our band?" And I said, "Well, I can, I guess." So the piece that they were working on was the whole C-flat suite. And I'd heard it, but I didn't know it. But anyway, so I did the rehearsal, and the players really loved my work. But I wasn't going to continue doing it. They hired somebody else to do the band later.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember what music you performed at those Allstates back in the early 1970s?
Yeah, sure. 1973, it was, what was the march? Capitol Hill by Charles Carter. And then I did, that's a really good march. You know that?
I know Charles Carter. He's Florida State.
I know. Check out Capitol Hill.
I will.
Really march. And then I did I think the next thing was the Intermezzo from Cavalleria Rusticana.
Mm-hmm.
Mascagni. Hold on a second.
Sure.
Yeah, the other big number. I'm sorry, I just found that I had to go look up the recording. The last piece was the first movement of the Glière Ilya Muromets, transcribed by Bennet.
Oh, okay.
It was Capitol Hill and the Intermezzo from Cavalleria Rusticana and the first movement of the symphony. Do you know that Glière?
No, I don't know that Glière.
Oh, it's good. I mean, he did a good job of making cuts in it. The original pieces. The first movement of the Glière is 20 minutes long, but he abridged it down to about 5 or 6 minutes. Mm-hmm. And it's very effective.
This is I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, so that was the junior high band. The senior high band was Bennet's Triumphal by Ribble. You know that march?
Mm-hmm, I do.
I love that march. It's brilliant. In fact, I just listened to it the other day, or this morning, because I did it with the I can't think of the band. Oh, Satellite High School played it, and I guess I rehearsed a minute. Anyway, that was the first thing, and then came the Royce Hall Suite by Willan. You know that?
No, I don't know that one.
You should know that. It's wonderful. Willan was mostly a choral composer. In fact, he took on the project that he said he couldn't score it for band, so he wrote it out for organ.
Oh, wow!
And William Teague transcribed it for band, and then I finished up with the. God, I feel like a complete idiot here. Oh, the Variations in Fugue by Giannini.
I wouldn't say that you sound like an idiot. You sound amazing that you can remember these.
Well, and that was an amazing concert, that senior high, because in those days the Florida Allstate concerts were held on the High Life Fronton. Yeah, ridiculous, I know, but that's the way it was. And the worst part of it was, it started at 7:30, but it was all the groups. So my kids are falling asleep there because the stage band went on for 10 minutes too long, and all that. So by the time we went in, it was 5 minutes to 11.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I thought to myself, what are we going to do? So I said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to take Bennet's Triumphal faster than we ever did in rehearsal. And boy, that did it. I woke them up, and they got into it so well. And the Royce Hall Suite is in 4 movements, and it's a gem. You check it out.
I'm going to.
You may have trouble finding a recording of it, actually, but and Willan is spelled Willan. He's a Canadian composer who, as I said, wrote mostly for chorus, and he didn't feel competent to write for band, so it was turned over to William Teague, who transcribed it for band.
I see that. I see the listing online. Yeah, there's a couple videos of it, of bands playing it.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
And like I said, the Giannini Variations in Fugue. That's a major challenge.
I know that's a standard rep. I've never played it. I've never played it or conducted it, but I know of it.
It's my opinion, it's Giannini's best work. I love the Third Symphony, don't get me wrong, but the Variation in Fugue is an even greater piece.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a major challenge. And it was a challenge in more ways than one, because it turned out I made some painful discoveries over the years. One of the things I discovered was that some of our dear band director friends didn't do their jobs properly. Like at least half a dozen of the kids in that senior high band never got the music until the day they came to the first rehearsal. Band directors didn't see to it that they got copies in advance.
Yeah, it's tough to sight read that stuff.
I mean, yeah, it's ridiculous. But of course, they were excellent players, so they learned quickly. But we had to work, really hard, especially on the Giannini.
Yeah, sure.
The difficult piece, both technically and musically.
Well,
it was a big success, because here we were at 11:30. We finished. We got a standing ovation. It lasted for pretty close to 5 minutes.
I'm curious about this because, we just talked about these pieces, and they're of an era, they're not really done very much anymore. And I'm kind of wondering, do you have a broader perspective on sort of the changes in the way?
Yes, I'll tell you what it is. The problem with band directors is they don't bother to explore the literature. They do. One of the things I discovered was band directors say, "What's the newest piece?" And I remember when they had these reading sessions of the stuff that was being added to the music list at the University of Florida, and the band directors kept on writing, "Oh, that sounds like a really neat piece. I think I'll get it." It was a brand new piece. Now, whether they ever explored older stuff, in many cases they did. In some cases they did, but in many cases they didn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and I have a very strong philosophy about this. My belief is, if you're a band director, you owe it to yourself and to the kids to explore the wide range of literature. And I don't just mean, the specific band literature. I mean pieces that are transcribed well for band that are of historical importance. For example, you go back to the Renaissance and Middle Ages, and there are good pieces. Do you know the Renaissance Master Suite by Philip Gordon?
No.
It's a little gem. It's easy pieces. It's grade 3, I think. Whatever, it's on our list. Philip Gordon did a lot of good work for the band profession by making these little suites. A little Shakespeare suite is another one of his, where he takes music from the Shakespearean era and transcribes it very well. Anyway, so I'm a great believer in going back. Let's see, what's the earliest piece you can play? Well, Guillaume de Machaut, there's nothing transcribed of his for band. But Andrew Boss, the composer.
Sure.
You know that name?
I do.
Yeah. Andrew has written a piece called A la Machaut,
which was written at my behest. I didn't tell him what to write. I just told him I commissioned him to write a piece, and he wrote this. And it takes little excerpts from different pieces of my show, and weaves it into the context. And it's a very good piece.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've got some other composers, but the real beginnings were helped by Gordon Jacob, who did the William Byrd Suite and the Giles Farnaby Suite, and took keyboard pieces from each one of those composers and transcribed them for band. And the transcriptions are not all great, but they're really good. I mean, I recommend them. Those are two major pieces. The Giles Farnaby is not as well known as the William Byrd. It's because Fred Fennell recorded the William Byrd Suite, but he never recorded the Giles Farnaby Suite. So naturally they think, that can't be important because Fred Fennell never recorded it. You know what I mean, right?
Yeah. Sure.
So, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say a lot of what we do in our business is we kind of follow the conductors and the composers, and we see what they're doing. Sort of the tastemakers is the phrase.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, the band directors are like, it's the same thing with marching band. I mean, they play the newest tunes on the field. You got to play the newest tunes for band instead of exploring the literature. And in my opinion, you should do a combination of both during your season of concert music. And these days, that's another thing that's changed. When I first came to Florida, nobody played concert music before Thanksgiving, except for a few people who did. But basically, no, we don't do. We do marching music all the way until the end of the football season. Then we'll play a Christmas concert, and naturally, we've got the usual thing there. Mm-hmm. 'Twas the night before Christmas and all that. And then finally you get into the so-called concert season. But that's different now. It's very different now. The bands around here, every one of them does a fall concert. Every one of them, yeah. But that was never the case in 1965. Never. Nobody ever did a fall concert.
Yeah, it's good. In my opinion, that's good because I think the concert band should be the center of the program.
Well, of course it should. It's a musical organization. Music is at the forefront. Mm-hmm. Period. Marching has its place. You do that, and you can do it as well as you can. Right. I mean, and there have been over the years many excellent marching programs that also have excellent concert programs. So that's not an excuse. Anyway, so you go through and you make a list. Do you know my book, Music for Concert Band?
I do know that book. Yes.
Well, that has everything. That probably has everything else that you need to know about me in it, because between me and Bob Hansborough, who is the band director of the College of St. Rose in Albany, we co-wrote the book. I mean, I wrote a large part of it, but Bob helped enormously.
Sure.
So, and I think we've come up with a really good book. And if you look through it, you've got everything there. In addition to the annotated pieces from grade 1 through grade 6. You have a list of marches. You have a list of show tunes and now lighter pieces and so on and so forth. It's broken up so that all the stuff that I think is worthwhile and important up to the year 2006 when the last edition came out is in there.
Joe, can you tell me about your relationship with the music of Percy Grainger?
Good question. In 1970, I knew the name Grainger, and I knew the Country Gardens. When I was growing up, I heard that. There was an easy piano arrangement of in one of my books. But I didn't know, didn't really take that music seriously. I didn't know. But starting in I'm just trying to think, I want to give you the exact time frame here. The first piece I got really serious about was Irish Tune from County Derry, and I fell madly in love with it. I thought, this is really great. And so I said, I got to find out more about Percy Grainger and what other pieces he wrote. So I noticed a couple of the band libraries had colonial songs in there, and I asked the band, you know this piece? No, it's in the library, but we've never played it. So I said, okay. So I'm going to bring it out. And I did it with a Melbourne High School band. And Melbourne High School band went over to USF to play and do a clinic with Jim Croft. And it was Croft. I may be mixing this up. Maybe it was Sperry. Anyway, and he said, gee, I forgot what a beautiful piece that was. I'm going to take it out and work on it and play it on tour. And he did. And pretty soon, people started picking up on other things of Grainger. And, of course, I pushed it. In 1966, Robert Scott, who was the band director at King High School, was bound and determined to do Lincolnshire Posy.
Mm-hmm.
And I had seen the score to it. There was no full score back then. And I looked at it. I said, this is really interesting, and blah, 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 blah. So he asked me to come in and do a rehearsal. I didn't really know the piece that well, but I'm a good score reader, and I just went mad over this. Great. So over the years, we had to deal with that condensed idiocy. Grainger said he'd never allow a full score to be published because band directors couldn't read it. That's true. He said, I want my music to be played, and these band directors don't like to deal with full scores. And in fact, when I started on my full score kick, because I started making full scores of a lot of things that had no full score published, and I finally got onto the Music Publishers Association, and I talked to the guy there, and I said, why don't you guys publish full scores? Oh, nobody likes to work with full scores. That's why we never publish.
Mm-hmm.
But that changed, and I'm one of the reasons, because I kept pushing this point, and pretty soon the publishers were coming out with full scores in addition to condensed scores. And now, a lot of those pieces that Carl Fischer did years ago, with Grainger, they came out with full scores that Mark Rogers made, among others, made the full score. But originally, those Grainger pieces had no full scores. None of them.
Mm-hmm.
None of them.
Yeah.
So, and anyway, in 1976, I guess it was 76, 77, Mel High played the Lincolnshire Posy, and I was sick and tired of dealing with this problem. So I said, you know what? I'm going to take the parts home, and I'm going to make a full score of it. And I did. And I passed the word around, and I contacted Fred Fennell, and I sent it to him. He says, oh, this is great. And of course, there were other full scores out there, but they weren't published. And finally, Fred got, who's publishing now? Ludwig, to publish a new edition of that and a couple of other Grainger people, but especially Lincolnshire. And he came out with his edition, and if you notice in the foreword, he mentions my name.
Excellent. So I'm going to ask you just a couple more questions, Joe, if that's okay.
Sure, ask away. This is fine. I'm fine answering anything you want to ask.
Okay, I really appreciate this. I know, I like to make sure that if I take your time, I get everything I need.
Sure.
So, Joe, you've had a long career in music. You've seen a lot of different things change in education. And so I'm going to ask you some sort of more broad questions about the music education.
Go ahead.
And the first is, where do you think the line is between healthy and unhealthy competition in music? When is it good and when is it bad?
Well, it depends on what you mean by competition. You mean contests with prize winners and all that kind of stuff? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, it could be anything. Some people use it think about it as like their own inner competitiveness. Some people think about contests. It's really up to you how you interpret it.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I think that I personally don't care for it. I mean, I think the competition that you have to make is with the music itself.
Yeah.
Your challenge is to make the music come alive off the page, and that's enough of a competition as far as I'm concerned. And I know that there's a lot of guys. I mean, it all comes from marching band after all. The tradition is, there's a trophy winner in marching competitions. In some states we know that. We don't have that here, but we have it in other states. Oh, you want want to win. I can't remember the big trophy that Texas gives away all the time. That people are always shooting for. I mean, it can be a motivation, but I personally think that you can shift the motivation away from that and onto the music itself. And I've seen it done many, many times. Some of the best concert band programs in the state deal with just the music. They don't deal with competition of any sort.
Joe, how did you find a work-life balance in your career?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, it is work, but I don't think of it as work. I mean, I'm lucky. I've been dealing with the music world since I was 6.5 years old, and I've always been totally absorbed by it. Now, that doesn't mean I haven't had to work, because I have. And people always, in fact, I used to go to some rehearsals, and this one girl said to me, she said, I have to carry a towel here to wipe off the sweat that you fling. Well, she was right. I mean, I sweated a lot of course, in those days I weighed a lot more. I weighed over 200 pounds until the 1990s, and I vowed I was going to lose all my excess weight. And ever since then, I've kept that regimen. So, but as far as I'm concerned, I've always loved the work. It's commanded me, and I mean, basically, I do other things. I love movies, although I don't go very often anymore because I don't have a car. So, but I look at videos. I mean, good videos, not crap. Good movies on TV and good drama programs on TV, stuff like that. And I used to do a lot of reading, but reading has become more difficult. I have to use small print classes now to read with, and that's kind of annoying. So, but that's been my life. And I have band directors, as I said, come over here, or orchestra directors come over here, and they bring me their recordings, and they want me to critique them, and I do. And or they want to ask me questions about then fine. I don't charge for my time. I do it because I believe in what I'm doing, and I believe in what they're trying to do.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Ultimately, we all have to have that inside of us to really have a career in music.
Yeah, I think so.
This is a big one, and from your perspective, what do you think are the great challenges we're facing in music education as we move forward into the 21st century?
Well, I think the greatest challenge we're facing is in all education. And as a matter of fact, I was just about getting ready to call Joshua Johnson on his program, A1A program on NPR, and that is this: we are being suffocated by video.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, don't get me wrong. Like I said, I'm not against video. I'm against all the uses of video. People are addicted to the screens now. They're looking at their phones all the time. Mm-hmm. I mean, to me, I'm sorry. I understand it, but it is taking away from the oral aspect, AURAL, the listening aspect. I'm not against the visual, but it's taking away when people are doing this all the time, and they're not listening to music. Mm-hmm. They should just turn off their videos and sit there and listen to some music for once and absorb it that way without any video distraction.
Yep.
To me, that's true of all education. Talk to the teachers, and I'll tell you the same thing. They have to tell their students, put away your phones. Because they're looking at their phones all the time while you're in the middle of class. I mean, come on. You can't do that and do your job properly. So the problem is video makes it really easy to, quote, learn, unquote, but you're not really learning. It's coming at you off of a screen, and it doesn't take concentration to learn it. Right?
No, I'd agree.
But when you're reading something, it does take concentration. Or when you're listening to music by itself, it does take concentration. And there's nothing wrong with that, but apparently, it's easier to not have to concentrate. Because that's work. I don't want to work that hard.
Absolutely. It's why I like this format that I do with the listening, because I find that listening to people talk makes you kind of place yourself in their shoes and makes you imagine it, as opposed to watching an interview where you can kind of be caught up in the visual of it.
Absolutely. I agree with you completely.
All right, Joe, this is my favorite question to ask, and this is, if I could give you a time machine to go back to your high school graduation, what advice would you give? What advice would you give yourself?
Keep learning. I mean, seriously. I mean, I began to appreciate learning in high school, thanks to one of the reasons, thanks to the music teacher there, Harris Vale. And listen, I really want you to get a hold of that interview.
I will.
The NBA Journal. And it's called A Life in Music, an interview with Joseph Kreines by John Almeida. John was for many years trumpet instructor at UCF, but he quit that job. Now he's teaching both at EFC. I mean, Eastern Florida here, which used to be Brevard Community College here, and also up at Seminole Community College.
Okay, and so the next question I ask, I don't mean this in a morbid sense. I really mean it is what piece has meaning to you and value to you, and and as opposed to your favorite work. What I'm asking is, what would be the final work for Wind Ensemble that you would want to conduct, and why?
I really, it's a really difficult question to pick one piece that I would want to be played at my memorial service. I'm not going to have a funeral. A memorial service, but it probably should be a Lancashire Posy. I mean, I'm identified with it.
Yeah.
But Variations in Fugue of Giannini.
Okay.
Emotionally, to me, that has as much power and content as any piece I can think of, and I would want it to be something substantive like that.
Joe, thank you so much for your time.
I'm glad to do it, and if you have any further questions or you want to follow up in any way, please feel free to call.
I will.
I'd be glad to talk to you.
All right. Thank you so much.